The town of Greywick had always been the sort of place where everyone thought they knew everything about everyone else. It was small enough that strangers were noticed immediately, quiet enough that gossip carried farther than the wind, and old enough that secrets seemed to settle into the soil like forgotten seeds. On the surface, it looked idyllic, a row of neat houses along Main Street, a diner that never closed, and a church bell that marked the hours as faithfully as it had for 100 years. But beneath the carefully polished routines, Greywick held memories that refused to stay buried. It began, as these things often do, with a funeral. Old Marjorie Kent had passed away in her sleep, leaving behind a stately house on Elmwood Avenue and decades of unspoken grievances. She had been both respected and feared in equal measure, her sharp eyes missing little, her sharp tongue cutting deeper than most people dared admit. At her funeral, the townsfolk gathered in their best black clothes, murmuring condolences to her daughter, Evelyn. They spoke softly about Marjorie's strength and honesty, but none of them missed the irony in the words. Marjorie had ruled Greywick with secrets. Everyone knew she had them. The mystery was only ever about how many. The first sign that something was different came 2 days after the burial. A letter arrived at the town hall, addressed to the people of Greywick. No one knew who had delivered it. No return address, no handwriting anyone recognized. The mayor opened it during a council meeting, expecting perhaps a complaint about property taxes or potholes. Instead, he found a single sheet of paper with one line written neatly across it. The truth always rises. Ask about the fire. Whispers started immediately. The fire. There had been many fires in Greywick's long history, but everyone knew which one the letter meant. 20 years ago, a blaze had consumed the old textile mill on the edge of town, killing 2 workers trapped inside. The official story had been a faulty fuse box. The tragedy had been mourned, then set aside. But now, with Marjorie Kent gone, questions returned like ghosts. It was Evelyn who found the next clue. While sorting through her mother's belongings, she discovered a locked box hidden at the back of the attic. The key was taped beneath a drawer in her mother's desk, as though Marjorie wanted it found, just not too easily. Inside were letters, documents, even photographs, all carefully labeled. And with them, a ledger. In tidy columns, Marjorie had kept records of names, payments, favors exchanged. It was a map of power, a web of influence that revealed how deeply her reach had gone. And in the middle of it all, the fire at the mill. The ledger showed that Marjorie had known more than she ever admitted. There were payments to the fire chief. There were notes about insurance fraud. And worst of all, there were hints that the fire had been no accident. The victims hadn't been unlucky workers. They had been targeted. Evelyn read through the pages with shaking hands, realizing with mounting horror that her mother hadn't just been a keeper of secrets. She had been a blackmailer, a manipulator, a woman who thrived on controlling others by what she knew. Word spread quickly. In a town like Greywick, it always did. And soon, everyone was looking at their neighbors differently. People remembered odd comments Marjorie had made, glances she had given, threats hidden inside smiles. Families began digging into their own histories, terrified of what might come out next. Evelyn, torn between loyalty to her mother and disgust at her actions, made the fateful choice to bring the ledger to the sheriff. That's when the unraveling began. The sheriff himself appeared in the book, his name tied to bribes dating back decades. When Evelyn confronted him, he denied it at first, then tried to confiscate the ledger. But by then, copies had already been made. Evelyn had shown it to her cousin, to the town's priest, to a journalist from the county paper. The truth, once set loose, refused to be caught again. Revelations tumbled one after another. The fire had been started deliberately to destroy evidence of embezzlement at the mill. The workers who died had threatened to expose it. The fire chief had been paid to look the other way. The mayor's predecessor had signed off on the insurance claim, pocketing money in return. And Marjorie Kent, she had known it all. Instead of speaking, she had used her knowledge to bind the guilty to her, holding their sins like strings she could pull at will. For years, Greywick had lived under her unspoken rule. People had avoided crossing her, unsure of what she might reveal. She had never needed to raise her voice or threaten openly. The mere suggestion of her knowing was enough. And now, in death, she had unleashed the very thing she had kept suppressed. The town descended into chaos. The sheriff resigned under pressure. The mayor faced investigation. Families once considered untouchable were suddenly shamed. Old friendships fractured under suspicion. For the first time in decades, Greywick felt like it might not survive its own truth. Evelyn watched all of this with a hollow ache. She had not intended revenge. She had only wanted clarity, an end to the shadow her mother had cast. But revenge had come anyway, not by her hand, but through the legacy of secrets Marjorie had left behind. It spread like fire itself, consuming reputations, livelihoods, even the illusion of innocence that the town had so carefully maintained. Some said later that Marjorie had orchestrated it, even in death, that she had wanted Greywick to burn in its own guilt. Others argued that it was justice long overdue. The only certainty was that the town would never be the same. Greywick's charm, its close-knit sense of knowing one another, had been shattered. What remained was a raw understanding that beneath every polite smile, every Sunday handshake, there could be betrayal. And so, Greywick lived on, quieter now, humbled by its own history. People no longer trusted easily. They kept their secrets closer, careful not to let them grow too heavy. But whenever the church bell rang across the town square, someone would think of Marjorie Kent and the revenge she had wrought without lifting a hand, proof that even in a small town, lies cannot stay buried forever. The nights in Greywick grew heavier after the revelations, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Once sleepy streets seemed darker now, the glow of porch lights unable to cut through the unease that had settled over everyone. Children whispered about ghosts when walking past the Kent house, and even the adults crossed to the other side of the street when they saw its black shutters staring like watchful eyes. Evelyn couldn't sleep. Every night, she heard noises from the attic where the ledger had been hidden, the creaks and sighs of the old house that now sounded like her mother pacing just above her. Sometimes she thought she smelled smoke, the acrid, clinging scent of burned wood and charred flesh, even though the fire at the mill had long since been reduced to ash and memory. Whether it was guilt, grief, or something else entirely, she couldn't tell. Meanwhile, the town began to eat itself alive. Anonymous letters appeared in mailboxes, exposing affairs, debts, betrayals. No one knew who sent them, but they all seemed to stem from the contents of Marjorie's ledger. Someone had taken it upon themselves to carry on her work, or perhaps finish it. Neighbors stopped speaking. Friends accused one another. The diner, once filled with laughter, now hummed with silence broken only by the clatter of cutlery. The sheriff, after resigning, vanished altogether. His house stood empty, the blinds drawn, the door left unlocked. Some said he had fled to escape prosecution. Others whispered he hadn't fled at all, that someone had made sure his secrets never reached the courtroom. On the riverbank one morning, a fisherman found a leather glove, soaked and stiff with blood. The glove belonged to the sheriff. His body never surfaced. The journalist from the county paper, who had seemed so eager to expose the town, disappeared too. His car was found abandoned on the old mill road, the keys still in the ignition, the trunk filled with his notes and tape recorders. The locals said he must have driven too close to the riverbank and slipped, though the car bore no signs of an accident. No footprints, no struggle, just an eerie stillness, as if the earth had swallowed him whole. By then, Greywick no longer needed outside help to destroy itself. Suspicion was enough. Farmers pulled guns on neighbors they had known all their lives. Shopkeepers accused their customers of theft before they had even reached the counter. Old grudges came alive with new fury. It wasn't the ledger anymore, it was the idea of it. Everyone feared what might be revealed, even if nothing existed. Fear itself became the weapon. And Evelyn, at the center of it, was no longer seen as the grieving daughter, but as the heir to her mother's power. Some begged her to destroy the ledger, to burn it and free them from its curse. Others demanded she release all of it, every name and every crime, so that no one would be left with the advantage of secrecy. She was trapped, hated, and needed in equal measure. One night, unable to bear it, she carried the ledger to the town square. The bell tower loomed above, its iron tongue ready to strike midnight. A small crowd had gathered, drawn by rumors that Evelyn was going to end it. She held the book high, the townsfolk's eyes glinting with both hope and dread. Then, without a word, she opened it and began to read. The names fell into the night like hammer blows. The mayor, the fire chief's widow, the banker who had quietly siphoned money from church donations, the pastor himself, whose voice had preached forgiveness while hiding sins of his own. Each revelation landed with gasps, denials, and shouts. Fists clenched. Tears ran. Someone threw a stone. Chaos threatened to spill into blood. But Evelyn kept reading. Page after page, she unleashed the past her mother had bound so tightly. She read until her throat was raw, until the ledger was empty, until every secret that had weighed on Greywick hung in the open air like smoke after a fire. When she finished, silence fell. No one moved. No one spoke. The book dropped from her hands and struck the ground with a hollow sound. And then, as if on cue, the bell struck 12. Some say the sound echoed longer than it should have, vibrating through the stones of the square and into the bones of every soul there. Others swore they saw Marjorie's shadow leaning from the bell tower, watching as her daughter carried out her final act of vengeance. Greywick never recovered. Families moved away. Businesses closed. The town that once pretended to be perfect now stood as a warning. Revenge had not simply exposed Greywick's secrets, it had consumed the town whole, leaving behind only ruins of trust and the lingering question of whether Marjorie Kent had planned it all from the very beginning.